Hey everyone, how are you? Happy Saturday. Happy Saturday. It's Paul Silva. Um, I'm jumping on here with a topic maybe a bit heavy for a Saturday morning. Maybe a lot of you guys are going to IKEA, having a meatball sandwich, meatball thing, or gardening or doing something like that. But this is a topic that's needs to be talked about, I think, a bit more. And it's quite serious, and that is, death and suicide and all that, in addiction and alcoholism. And you know that's one of the things in my work with people in recovery, and even for myself. It's life and death for so many of us. It can be life and death. It's not cute. It's not the drunk uncle thing. It's not cute, because for many people, that goes down a really dangerous and sad path. And so, my work with people, this one reason, I'm proposing to launch a course in September, and it's going to be working with people, already in recovery, but who are looking to up level their sobriety, which means, like, there was a point where I got where it's like, that's it, this is it. Is there more to this? And it's really about getting in touch with yourself and with people and finding the fun again and dealing with shame and fear and anger. And so it's going to be a 6 weeks course, and there'll be more details. This is not a pitch for that. It's just laying the foundation for why I've been doing what I've been doing for so long and helping people in recovery. And, we hear about, deaths, people in recovery, people suffering. We know about ODs and stuff like that, but there's not very often that on a death certificate or report will it say alcoholism. A lot of times there's things that happen. So popular ones or well-known ones like liver disease. We all know that, cirrhosis. Cerebral hemorrhaging. I mean, Richard Burton, that's how he died. There's a lot of famous people, obviously, that died from alcoholism and addiction. Renal failure, liver disease. I mentioned heart attacks. Billie Holiday, she essentially drank herself to death. There was a congenitive heart or some heart failure. Accidental deaths that happen, when people are high or drunk and they fall and slip and all that. A lot of deaths that way as well. Pneumonia, Raymond Chandler. That's how he drank himself to death as well. But the official cause was pneumonia. And, Slayer, Jeff Hanneman. I used to listen to Slayer all the time. I had the long hair too, the whole thing. So just everything black. But he died, and his band actually said that it was alcoholism. He died officially by cirrhosis. But so, one thing that doesn't pop up as well on a report necessarily, and is alcohol related, and that's suicide. And that is a big one. And I have my story around that as well. But, looking at stats, 90% of suicides or attempted suicides, the person has either suffered depression, substance abuse disorder, or both. Because depression, like mental health and addiction, there's a lot of that. We call them double winners. We call that, and not in a positive way. Like, we get to help a lot of people because we have mental health issues and addiction issues. So we're double winners. But people with substance abuse issues are 6 times more likely to attempt suicide than those without. Veterans, we don't talk a lot about veterans. We talk a lot about PTSD, of course, but a lot of men who have substance abuse issues, veterans, are twice as likely to commit suicide. Women, female vets who have substance abuse problems are 6.5 times more likely to attempt suicide. If you get into, opioid, which is it's the big thing right now, has been for a couple of years, men are twice as likely. That's the biggest area, like in terms of people committing or attempting suicide. Men are twice as likely to attempt, those who are on opioids, and women 8 times more likely to commit suicide attempt. And then if you get into the sub areas like LGBTQ, that alone already with young people, that has a higher rate. and add substance abuse, which happens a lot, they're 7 times more likely to attempt suicide. Just want to welcome a few, Valerie and Alan and Joe. Good morning, Joe. Dawn. Alan is wondering what the stats are on millennial substance abuse. That's a good question. And I'll have to look into that. That's a really good question. And, you know, the stats, you know, probably cover more people our age. But I know that in terms of suicide overall, yeah, you know, I know in the younger crowd, that wouldn't be the millennials necessarily now. Millennials in their 30s now. It's just weird to think that. Anyway, it's, you know, with suicide, that is a large cause of deaths in addiction and alcoholism. And I had, and I can tell you that I was probably most suicidal when I first got sober. And I'm going to share a little bit from my book, from Longing for the Spirit. And I talk a little bit about that because, you know, whenever I hear about someone, you know, committing suicide, it just stabs me. It's because I know what it's like to be in that place. And for a lot of people in addiction, and that's why, again, why I take it so seriously, because for those of us in recovery, to go back out, especially if you've been sober for some time, a lot of times it's death. And so that's why I take this so seriously. So I just want to read a little section. It's from my book, and it's called this essay, whatever you want to call it. It's called "The Window Played to the Scene of Me." And so I was talking about, so, you know, I had no job. I was living in a basement apartment at the time, by the way. So I had no job. So my days consisted of 12-step meetings, looking for work, and trying not to drink. I rode on a perpetual roller coaster. One minute I wanted to hug everyone in the street, the next I wanted to strangle them. And there were days I hated meetings, I hated the people that went there, and I hated recovery, and I hated myself. And I hated me for me, and I sometimes wish I didn't have to deal with me anymore, sober or drunk. It was like living on a Mobius strip where I couldn't live with drinking and I couldn't live without drinking. I existed on both sides of the paper and yet not on it at all. If you'd asked me how I was doing during those days, I would have shot you a smirk and cried out, "Living the dream!" I may have punctuated with a noogie or some jig. Perhaps I would have given you a brotherly punch on the shoulder. About 2 months into my still minty fresh recovery, I was taking the bus to an early morning meeting. I sat on my favorite seat, left side, single seat beside the big central window, loner's corner. That's what I called it. The bus was about a block or two away from the terminal station and was in queue to make a left turn. And traffic held us in line for a while. And as I sat waiting, I had this overwhelming, unexpected, and astonishingly firm resolution that I would commit suicide at the subway station. Just like that. Suicide, the final sacrifice. And I didn't think of my wife or my young boy in that very moment. I was self-absorbed in the pain of not being able to live the way I was, or not thinking I could. Ending my life in a horrific and absolute way only seemed fitting and logical. My family would be better off without me, without having to deal with old Alky Paul. There would be no more need to check in on me or worry about my state of mind. Sure, there would be overdue library fines to deal with and closets to be cleaned, but the short-term annoyance would yield a longer-lasting sigh of relief. They say that suicide is a selfish act. I would argue that it's a desperate human response to pain that is overwhelming and voracious. I was so wrapped up in my own darkness that there was no room for light of rational thought. My state of mind became warped. I truly could not see a life worth living when my one and only way of coping had been removed from me. Everything stung at the lightest touch. I saw the final definite knot at the end of this unraveling thread of my existence. As I walked off the bus and down the stairs to the subway platform, something shifted in me. The want and need to step in front of one of those rushing trains dissipated. It was as if my mind was hijacked with some sense of grace, long enough for me to make it down to my meeting, where I was still shaking with fear and copious amounts of strong coffee. I confessed my thoughts, my suicidal thoughts, that morning to a group of strangers. Some nodded their heads or patted each other's backs as I shared. A few came up to me afterwards and told me that they too had similar thoughts on their journey. I would have to take care of my own library fines for the time being. The next day I was on the same bus route, heading to the same subway station. I sat in the same seat by the same big central window. The bus was in the same place, stopped and waiting to make that left turn. Traffic held us once again. And outside the window was a bright blue sky blanketing a church. And about 6 feet from me, a casket was being hoisted into the back of a hearse. Family members wailed and flailed, smacking the palm of their hands with their fists as children watched, blank-faced and wide-eyed. I looked at the casket. I pictured myself in it. I saw my wife's face on one of the women curled up on the sidewalk, legs splayed out like a newborn foal, wearing yellow heels. I saw my son's face planted on the little boy wearing a tie that was too tight, not knowing why he had to dress up so nicely to only see other nicely dressed people cry. I felt the heat from that moment in my skin, and I held on to the pain that was the scene painted in. I wanted to hold on just a little bit longer, but the bus pulled away. But 6 months later, after a day at my new job, I was on a bus going home, and I sat again in Loner's Corner. It was snowy and overcast out, and the windows were caked with salt, grime, and frost. I couldn't see anything out of those windows. The bus was waiting to make a left turn. Traffic held us in line for a while. And as we waited, I caught a small movement on the window beside me. Someone was drawing a happy face from the outside of the bus. A simple, happy face looking at me. And just as the smile swoop of the face left the person's finger, the bus was on its way out. And I watched this happy face, seemingly random in its time and place, and thought about my journey of recovery. Faith and love in God had taken me there. That window had cataloged me in 2 short scenes over many months. One had shown me the darkness that could come from light, and the light that could come from darkness. I was shown that there are outcomes, choices, and ways of being. I felt the power in both scenes. I felt the power. The window played host to the scene of me. Thank you for letting me share that. And once again, it's, recovery. It's a way of life. It's a way of reclaiming our life. It's a way of being. Because the alternate can be really, really painful and terminal. So thank you for letting me share, guys. I know it's pretty heavy. You can go back to your IKEA meatball sandwiches or whatever it is you do. Thank you for sharing. And if there's, if you yourself are struggling or know someone, or if you're in recovery and you're struggling a little bit with that in terms of where you want to go, just message me and, we'll figure out what we can do. Okay. Take care, guys. Have a great weekend.